My guest today on the Neil Wilkins podcast is Dr. Greg Banks. Now, Greg is a veteran educator, researcher, entrepreneur, and edtech thought leader. This is somebody who knows a little bit about AI, tech, and education. And we're going to try and weave those things together in this conversation and see where we can understand the value will come from using things like AI in our own learning and development. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Thank you so much, Neil. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? That I guess a lot of us take kind of for granted the fact that technology supports us in all facets of life. I mean, be it, getting us from place A to place B, learning
Mhm.
X versus Y, and pretty much everything in between. Where did you kind of start to see this kind of, importance of technology in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, education is a place that is often the beneficiary, let's say, of lots of tech innovations. People are aware of how big a gap there is between what we might like to do in education and where things are at. And my experiences in the U.S. system, in the K-12 system, mostly in the high school, some middle school as well. Um, and I've been involved in that for 20 years now. And I recall early in my career, this was when people were using smart boards and PowerPoints, and this was pre-smartphone and really pre-internet. Um, Someone invented these things called clickers, and they're essentially like remote control devices that interacted with the smart board that would allow you to essentially poll students on a question, maybe a multiple choice question or a ranking question. And this was really the first time anything like that came about. And we were given a set to try out. And I remember being blown away thinking, wow, this is going to change education from here on, because now I can find out right now in a moment what my students understand. I don't have to wait to give them some kind of written item and then grade it later and figure out what they know. I can find out right here and right now, and I can respond in the latter part of my lesson and change things. So I remember using them, and it was exciting at first. This was like, I don't know, 2006. It was exciting at first. Students were really into it, but it took a long time to get them out of the little bins. It was distracting to students. They played around with them. It took a while to get them back on task when I put them away. And in the end, I got some information, but it wasn't all that useful. And so the upshot of that experience for me is that while I used them a little bit, very quickly I put them away and never took them out again. And I understand similar technology is used more often today in, say, college classrooms where you have 300, 400 students in a lecture hall, and it still has a place. But my thinking that, hey, this is going to change the way teaching happens in the classroom, in the K-12 classroom here in the US, was way off. And this happened over and over again. I remember when the internet first kind of became big, and there was an administrator who came in my classroom um, and said, we don't need to teach students facts anymore because they have access to all the information that they ever want to know on the internet. And there was a while where we thought, okay, well, maybe we should change our teaching to accommodate for that. That we don't need to teach them facts anymore. And of course, if you look at the research, you see that you actually need to know things in order to think. Um, it supports critical thinking. It supports reading comprehension. Like, the more you know, the better you're able to learn. So the idea that we no longer need to learn things and remember things was way off. Um, and that happened with phones. When phones came out, people thought, hey, this is great. Everybody has a computer in their pocket. And it turned out that phones are incredibly distracting. And it's coming out now that they're actually detrimental. It seems to be that they're detrimental to socio-emotional development for kids. And more schools are banning phones. It happened again with MOOCs, massive online open courses, where the idea was, hey, we can have um, students learn from the rock stars in every field. They can take courses with MIT professors, with Harvard professors, and everyone can sit in the comfort of their own home and learn. And it was this idea that kids could attend school uh, from anywhere uh, over the internet on a screen. And of course, we tried that during COVID, uh, especially for quite a bit of time here in the U.S., and it was a disaster. With the exception of just a few students, it's a terrible way for most kids to learn. So, time and time again, these technological innovations have come in with the promise of radically changing K 12 education for the better. And in the end, haven't really changed anything. School essentially operates the same as it's always operated. There are still kind of the same challenges. And these technologies, though they're used sometimes, they're really peripheral. And so when AI became something that was on the horizon for K 12 education, I kind of had this feeling like, oh no, here we go again. And I'm actually very positive about AI, and I think a lot of other teachers are too, for a number of reasons. I think AI is different. And if we approach the implementation of AI in K 12 education the right way, it has the potential to actually be incredibly beneficial without the disappointment and, say, in the case of phones, the negative effects that other technologies have had.
So where would you think then? I mean, just really as a starting point, I mean, where would you think we are able to almost plan and strategize ahead to make sure we don't fall into those same kind of little pitfalls? Because one of the things, obviously, that I think a lot of people are thinking here, this fear that I mean, let's start with jobs, for example, the fear that it is going to replace things. And I have my view that it's here to complement, but I think a lot of people are still mindful or fearful that it's here to take away the teacher in front of the class, or it's here to take away the administration support. Again, this is all the fabric of education as we know it. I mean, do you feel that if we're able to kind of plan ahead sensibly, we will be able to mitigate those things? Or do you think they are just an inherent part of change and it's going to happen anyway?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've heard some of those similar arguments. I mean, I think it's always helpful to look at what's actually happened. So when we put kids in front of screens to learn, they don't tend to do well. I mean, there's the COVID school example, and in my experience, we have had students sit down for online classes. Say we didn't have a particular course that they wanted to take, and so we'll get them connected to a computer course where they're essentially going at their own pace. It's geared toward them. It's not necessarily AI centered, but it's got a lot of the same qualities. And they're interested in it. They'll do it for an hour a day, but there's no way that they would be willing to do it for school. There's no way they'd be willing to do it all day as their mode of learning. It's just not how kids are set up. So this idea that anything on a screen is going to become school, I think misunderstands what's actually happening in school, and that's actually why I wrote the book. It's a combination of kind of my own experience as a teacher and that I feel of my colleagues, as well as what I've learned from the research. And essentially, uh, why school works is that there's a teacher-student relationship that forms the pillar of the structure for the student to allow the student to make that connection, to feel that what they're doing is important and worthwhile. And what the student gets from school, yes, they get learning, but I mean, learning's everywhere, right? If all it was about learning, they could go on the internet. However, you look at SAT scores, you look at IQ scores, they haven't improved with the internet despite information being everywhere. Having information around isn't enough for learning. It needs to be a lot more. And that's what's going on in school. So when I wrote the book, I tried to lay out what is actually happening in school. And it can be broken down into kind of three areas. You have that teacher student relationship, which really forms the main supportive structure of the whole thing that we call school. And then, of course, you have gaining in curriculum. And I was a chemistry teacher for many years. So chemistry or English or math. And then the third kind of pillar is the classroom culture. So for most students, they learn in groups. And so what is going on in the classroom, what's happening with this class as a group kind of forms the third pillar. And uh, while AI can help with those things, Number one, it can't replace this teacher-student relationship, and it shouldn't interfere with it. And it can support curriculum and it can support the classroom culture, but it can't replace those either. Um, so, with those things in mind, it's my hope that developers can create tools that are going to help teachers do the things that teachers have been struggling to do, and enable outcomes to be better.
Feels that the common theme of some of the examples, Greg, that you've talked about so far, I mean, certainly some of the older technologies, and I can remember those days, the clickers and everything else, all the way through to kind of today, is kind of almost the theme here is this sort of social ability, socialness, the humanness, if you like, behind this. Because as you said there a number of times, is that, you know, you can learn from a screen, but that's only one tiny proportion of what we would term education. And a big chunk of the quality of education comes from human interaction, which obviously through, you know, other means, the COVID years, etc., was very, very limited. And all the research kind of points to that not being a great experience for the vast majority. Do you feel that there could, though, be cases, and I'm actually thinking from a personal perspective here, because earlier in their schooling, my two daughters, we actually had a couple of years of homeschooling for a whole variety of reasons.
Hmm.
And actually some of the best outcomes there from them personally was actually this ability to be self-sufficient, to be able to do research, to be able to kind of find things, almost because there wasn't the parent teacher, the teacher student relationship there, is because they were left to their own devices. Now, I guess for some pupils, some students, that could actually be a positive thing. Is there research there? Is there a kind of a view? And what would you say to that? Is that, you know, because obviously not one size doesn't fit absolutely all, does it?
Right, right. Well, I'm a big supporter of homeschooling. I think the more variety of models we have in schooling, the better, because kids are all different, families are all different, people are all different, and I think kids do best when they can plug into what works best for them, as you talked about. And a lot of what works when let's say public education works is also happening in homeschool. And I would ask you, um, I have this image of your daughters kind of doing research. Was there a point where they talked to you about their research? Did that ever happen?
Oh, absolutely. There was still that connection. Yes. Yeah. I mean, this was obviously when they were quite a bit younger. This was kind of pre-examination stage when we wouldn't have had the confidence to be able to guide, anybody through the current sort of assessment process. Because, oh my goodness, it's changed since we were young, I think
Fair
is what
enough.
a lot of parents would say. So this was pre that. And certainly, yeah, there was a lot of sharing. And both my wife and I, we were very kind of almost surprised the fact that they could become quite self-sufficient and quite resilient. We thought that we would have to do a lot more, let's call it teaching at the
Mhm.
time, but actually found that sort of inside them there was this kind of couple of researchers, which kind of flourished and bloomed. And yeah, it was quite a surprise, to be fair.
Mhm. Mhm. So what I would highlight in your example, and it makes perfect sense to me that that would be the outcome. You were the stand-in, let's say, for the teacher, and one of the things that the teacher does is the teacher communicates care and concern for the student, and obviously, especially as the parent, you have that even more so. But by being interested in what they were learning and that they were learning, you showed that it was important and that it was valued, and that's really is an essential part of that central pillar. That's really what makes it work in all cases. Another thing that I'm hearing is that there was a point in the learning where there was a group discussion, and even if the group was two people, let's say, there was an oral discussion of what was being learned and what the ideas were, and that's really an important part of the learning. Um, where there's a quote I'm going to paraphrase from Lev Vygotsky, which is learning occurs first on the social plane before it's internalized, and that's the idea that there's a discussion about what is going on here in this particular situation, whether it's something about science or history or technology or a book. And there's that discussion of what's happening here, and people share their ideas, and it's almost like they are trying out particular models that they are considering adopting in terms of knowledge. And by sharing all of those models, the group comes to some sort of consensus. It doesn't mean everybody agrees 100%, but there comes to be some kind of consensus in terms of like what's going on here. And that allows people, that interaction allows people then to gain and benefit and adopt hopefully an even more correct and more informative and more beneficial bit of knowledge than they would have had they done it by themselves. And from your example, it sounds like that happened with you and your wife in discussion with your kids. And so it sounds to me like a lot of the same beneficial things were happening with homeschooling.
So I'm kind of sort of feeling a sense of maybe there's two kind of elements at play here. I'd love your take on this, Greg. So on the one hand, there is this idea then of, with the emerging technologies that are enabling, I guess we could call it hyper personalization. I mean, it's a phrase that's being
Mm.
used a lot within AI circles, and the whole idea of, as a user of AI, it can be hyper personalized, but certainly as an educator, you could, in theory, hyper personalize the experience for every pupil, every student. But at the same time, this balance between this kind of consensual thing where you're actually coming together as a group of individuals, humans, to kind of agree or disagree on particular topics. It feels like we kind of need in education both of those things happening almost concurrently or in parallel. So you have this kind of group thing going on, but at the same time as this hyper personalization, because that to me, that would feel like it's the sweet spot. I get the education in the form that suits me as a human, but I also get then the chance to sort of test out my view, my ideas, my thinking in a group sense. Is that kind of this almost this perfect central point that we're both trying to get both sort of elements to play into?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And to the personalization, I would add um, data analysis. So, kind of the two bits of low hanging fruit in education where AI could be really helpful is uh, let's say that a teacher is preparing some materials for the next day. They realistically only have time to make one version of it, maybe two, if they're really stretching. But AI could make multiple versions that are informed by past data for particular students. That personalization that you're talking about, and that would be a huge benefit to teachers and students. The other area is taking massive amounts of data that the teacher may not have time to process, taking those data and summarizing the takeaways in terms of what should the teacher think about in the next lesson or the next week. So that's another bit of low hanging fruit that AI could do. It would really help teachers. And notice in both of those examples, that's not about the AI bot substituting for the teacher or replacing the discussion that you're talking about, because at its core, that's really what's happening when teaching works, when teaching and learning work well, is there is that conversation and there is that uh, that group experience um, that is so meaningful to students. And that's why I don't think that teachers are going to be replaced. Um, is that kids know that AI can't care and AI can't want. And in the end, kids are not going to care what the AI thinks, but they are going to care what the teacher thinks. They are going to care what their parents think. They are going to care what their peers think. Like that's just how we're wired. And AI is a wonderful tool, but it can't replace those other things.
I just, when you kind of were talking about the lesson planning there, I couldn't help but start to think about the practicality of that and some of the risks that potentially might kind of come into play there. I mean, this is kind of going off piste slightly, but maybe not. And some of these questions, I guess, are going to be kind of rhetorical questions rather than actually you even sort of being able to come up with an answer. And I'm not really trying not to put you on the spot here, Greg. But one of the things that I was thinking here is in terms of bias, because if I'm a teacher pulling together a lesson plan and then it gets disseminated out to my class, and based on the individuals in that class, they then get their personalized version of the master lesson plan based on their previous inputs. It's going to be this kind of input output thing, isn't it? That if I'm a pupil who has done, incredible work to this point, I've got all my homework in on time, I might be sort of, in the top half of the class in terms of actual grades, etc. I might then get a very different, based on the AI, a very different experience from that lesson plan to somebody who hardly turns up, doesn't make any effort, really couldn't care less, not interested in their grades. There could be then an interpretation that actually this becomes very biased because it starts to really reward those who are making the effort and penalizing those who don't. Is there an inherent issue in here with AI?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. I think, I think that's a risk. Um, and no matter where you land with the materials that you're giving students, there's always some kind of risk. So if it's a one size fits all, then what you're risking is, if this is the window in which the curriculum falls, and you have students that are maybe more advanced, or students that maybe they were absent and they missed a bunch of the lesson, they're going to be in a situation where they may be bored, or they may be don't have the prior knowledge to access the lesson, and so especially with those students who maybe were absent, they're going to fall even further behind because they can't access the new information. Um, so that's a big risk here. So as a first step, what I would say is let's try to make it better. And as a second step, you're right. We need to watch out for that in terms of not selling students short, in terms of what they're capable of doing. And I keep talking about printing things out, and part of the reason why I do that is I've actually seen a move away from using, let's say, laptops in the classroom, because there are so many distractions that come with laptops, which is ironic because for years we kept saying, hey, we need one-to-one laptops in the classroom, and then we'll be able to teach 21st century skills. Well, it turns out that laptops are incredibly distracting because you can shop and you can play games and watch videos, and students do that. When I would go into classrooms as an administrator, I would sit in the back and I would see students watching movies and doing their shopping and playing games. And so more and more teachers are having students put laptops away and moving back to paper. But if there were, and this is another opportunity, if there were some other way to include, let's say, a non-laptop bit of technology that could really gear to the student that you're talking about, who maybe initially would be um, thought to be, okay, well, this student might need easier information. As that student starts succeeding, then the AI could ramp things up and find the sweet spot. And there are actually programs that are already starting to do that. There's a math program called Delta Math, that will kind of give you harder and easier things until it finds your particular level. And so I think that's very, very doable with technology. We just need to get it right in terms of what's the right way to present it to students in a classroom setting.
And I suppose that there is again, another kind of call from the past here, where we've seen obviously the spawning of brand new industries in terms of the pupil, the child actually then progressing into things that are things like games programming, etc., which when we were back at school was not even a thing. I mean, who would have gone for a career in games programming, whereas now it's one of the biggest growth industries on the planet. So coding, etc., comes in as an opportunity. With the advent, obviously, of AI, we've got a whole new discipline, which is prompt engineering coming through. And so
Mm-hmm.
what it might do, this approach of AI within education and using it in the classroom, is it might start to identify those students who potentially are going to become the prompting gurus of the future, because they are just able to manipulate the ed tech in such a way that it really benefits them. So maybe identifying, those experts of the future. Did you see it kind of opening these things up? Because it feels like that could be a real positive, certainly for some students.
No, schools are just freaking out right now. They're in the freaking out stage, Neil. Um, and I say it that way because the first response that schools had to undertake is, how do we prevent kids from cheating on their homework? How do we get kids from putting a prompt into ChatGPT and getting an essay that they then turn in and get an A on, when it doesn't represent their work? I think some teachers are moving towards what I would call the assimilative stance, which is how do I teach with AI? And that's more to what you're talking about. And I think ultimately that's really where schools need to go, because in terms of work being done outside of school, because as you say, like it's going to be a tool that everybody is going to use in the same way that a computer is a tool everybody uses now. And so students do need to know productively how to use it. So I think prompt engineering is one part. I think it's going to look different in different disciplines in terms of how it can be used. But I think that's another opportunity. That's really more about teacher training. Like how do you help teachers teach with AI? And there really isn't a lot of good information. It is really limited to like how do you use um, chat gpt searches in your lessons. It's very narrow, and so I think it's going to take us a while before we can do things that are productive that way. And I think that will solve the worries that schools have in terms of students using AI inappropriately outside the classroom. Um,
Mm.
the uses that I am most excited about are the ones that I call behind the scenes. And this actually ties into a number of conversations that have happened on this podcast previously, which really highlight what are the things that humans bring that only humans can bring. And I think one of the things that this AI revolution, let's call it, is going to highlight is what are the now that we have this kind of superpower in the same way that the Industrial Revolution brought a physical superpower, right? So much stronger than any human could ever be. Um, Now AI is let's just call it knowledgeable. It's more knowledgeable than any human. So what is it that humans bring? And I think the more that number one, students can learn to use the tool, and number two, learn how their unique human element can then take the benefits of that tool and put it to good use. I think that's where the opportunities are going to be, both for adults who are looking to navigate this career wise, but also for students who are looking for ways to like, how do I find a career in a world where AI exists?
Because it really is kind of changing everything, isn't it? I think the way that it's being integrated into business or not. I think there's the players and then the non-players, and the non-players seem to be very quickly becoming obsolete because they're less efficient. So there's a huge efficiency thing happening in business right now. Obviously, we've got agents coming in to replace certain types of work, be it
Mhm.
customer service or accounting or whatever. It could almost sort of redefine what it means to be in school, in education, because not necessarily from the teacher's perspective, but from the actual learning perspective, what it means to be HR'd in the education system, because it could very well be it is about working with your bot, your AI agent, to co-create and kind of collaborate, learn a learning experience, rather than
Mhm.
being, okay, there's my teacher, I listen to them and I learn from them. It feels that there's more parties involved here now.
Right, and I could see that being the case. Not unlike interacting with a textbook or going to a series of websites and gathering information. That's that I could see that very much being a part of the lesson. Um, but there's still that essential part of let's say a group learning or learning with a teacher as opposed to learning on one's own, where at some point the teacher has given the students a task, and at some point the students return to the teacher and say, this is what we've learned, this is what we think is the answer to the question that you've posed or to the challenge that you've given us. um, and so where the resources come from in order to equip the student to have that conversation or to produce that project, that's wide open, and AI could be very helpful with that. um, what I see AI not replacing is that cycling back to the teacher to have that conversation and to have that meaningful interaction, where the teacher says, gives them feedback, and where teacher says, I really like that. I think that could have been better. That part's a little bit off, um, and uh, I think there's lots of opportunity there for AI to accelerate the knowledge gathering part.
Do you think there's still going to be a part for the whole kind of creative space within education then? Because obviously, with large language models kind of literally regurgitating past knowledge, past work, past experience, research, etc., they're all based within a, okay, it's very, very big, but within a finite kind of ecosystem. They're not really designed to stretch the boundaries. They're correlating past data and information. Is there a
Mm.
place still, do you think, in education for the human spirit to be innovating and producing creativity? Because it feels like even though the very best AIs kind of almost masquerade as being creative, they're not, because they are just using past information, maybe regurgitating it in a slightly creative way, but it's not new. There is nothing new currently coming out of AI. So do you think
Mm.
in education there's still that place for the foreseeable future, that as humans, as little humans as well, little learning humans in school, there's still a part that you could come up with the next great idea just because you're human?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's um, I have this image in my mind. It's someone else's. I can't remember who at this point, but uh, there's always every generation has its frontier of knowledge, and you have to get out through the known all the way to the edge of what's not known before you can start to weigh in on the conversation about what's beyond the frontier. And I'm hopeful that AI can help people get to that frontier faster in terms of learning things faster, having access to more information. Um, but you're right. At some point, if AI is only able to draw on what is already known, or really what it's been fed about what is already known, um, it, at some point, it's going to take humans to hypothesize about what is not known. I don't know how far AI can go with that. Um, I mean, I think one of the things that AI could be useful for is to iterate. So, at one school I taught at, we had a great design course, and this design course was all about kind of making new things. And the process was to take things that had already been made and think about putting them together in new and different ways, or taking solutions to a different problem and applying them to the problem that you're trying to solve. And that led to things that we would collectively call really creative ideas. And they were new-ish in the sense that no one had ever applied those particular concepts to this particular problem in this particular way, and yet they were also iterative in that they were drawn from other things. So, what I would hope in this situation is that ChatGPT or other LLMs are able to pull together so much useful information that's adjacent to a problem, such that it's very fertile ground for humans to then think about, like, well, what hasn't been tried, what hasn't been thought of in this situation. But I don't know.
Mm.
That's new. That's new ground.
Yes, and it is. And I think this is the lovely thing, but also the really tricky thing about what we're talking about here. It's so new ground. There is no real kind of playbook, I guess, until now. I mean, seamless link there into your new book, Greg, which is called Aligned, a love letter to developers on what we need from AI to improve education. I mean, it feels like a book of hope. Are you hopeful?
I am actually. I'm cautiously hopeful and intentionally positive, um, and that's why I framed it as a love letter as opposed to an op-ed. Um,
Mm.
and I say that I'm optimistic because um, I do think AI is different from other technologies in what it can offer, and from many of the things that we've already discussed. It's not going to insert itself in between the teacher and the student, but it's going to has the potential to give teachers superpowers and allow them to do things they haven't been able to do before. But we're at an important juncture here. Right now, teachers are open to using AI. I think they're generally positive in how they look at it. Um, as with other technologies, however, education is kind of the experimental ground for a lot of ideas, and what often happens is new programs will come in, and teachers will be required to do them for a year or 2 years. They don't tend to work, and teachers waste a lot of time and energy and effort and get no benefit, and students don't get any benefit, and then those programs get scrapped and something else gets tried the next year. So in order for these AI tools to not just be more of the same, we have this window where teachers are like, yes, let's try something AI. I want to learn about how to do this. I want to help my students learn to use this. I want to use it in my practice. If that goes well, then that's going to lead to more interest and adoption. If it doesn't go well, that's going to lead to, this is just like everything else. Let's go back to what seems to work at least a little bit better. And people will be less likely to use it. So and that's not helpful for anyone. And so that's really why I wrote the book. So I've been working on a research project and using an LLM to help teachers adopt a new science curriculum, and was having a conversation with one of the developers, who's a brilliant guy, uh, and we were talking about an aspect of the classroom, about how the classroom worked, and I made a comment that if I were sitting with a group of teachers, they all would have been like, "Oh yeah, everybody knows that," but it was a complete surprise to him. And I think that's true about any field. I think people forget the depth of expertise they have and the understanding they have about how their particular field works. And the same thing is true with education. Just because someone went through school doesn't mean they understand how teaching works. In the same way that if you go to the doctor, you don't understand how practicing medicine works, or if you go to a restaurant and you eat the food, it doesn't mean you know how to cook it. So it occurred to me that, like, if these developers are going to make products, going to be able to make products that are useful and beneficial and that are going to provide that positive impact, they're going to need to know a little bit about how teaching works behind the scenes. So that was the inspiration for the book. I wanted to make it small, short, usable, very graphics based, so that developers could have these mental models and keep them in mind as they are creating. And so that was my intention with the book.
Fascinating. A final question for you, Greg, and this might be this is actually, I say it might be, it is putting you on the spot. Anybody in education, be they a developer or an actual educator, so somebody who is teaching, or maybe somebody who's an administration part of the teaching system, if there was one question you could pose to them to get them to think about the part they can play in the evolution of AI in education, what question would you pose to them? Not such that you get an answer, but to really help them understand the part that they could play as we move this thing forward.
That is a hard question. Um, I mean, I think what I would say is, um, I would ask them to take a step back and forget what they know at this moment about the limitations that they're up against. Because I think so often in teaching, there's so much more that you want to be able to do for your students than you can actually do, and you get to the point where you realize, okay, maybe I want to do this much, but I can only do this much because of time, um, because of other constraints. And so what I would say is, okay, take a step back. If there weren't any constraints, what would you want? What would you want for your students? And I think starting there, because I think there are lots of ways that AI allows teachers to break the rules of those limitations. So, creating 30 different versions of a particular bit of materials that you were going to give to students the next day, like no teacher can do that. Or being able to process a big stack of, let's say, 100 pages of student work and coming up with a summary of what everybody knows and what should happen next. Like no teacher can do that. So forgetting what those limitations are and saying, if you could dream up anything that would be helpful for your students, what would that look like? Um, because that it's like a second chance, I think, to start again. And I think that is something that will also inspire teachers and get them excited about trying out these new products, because it's going to be a bumpy ride as implementation happens. So we all need to be ready for that.
That's a brilliant answer to the question. It really is. I had no idea what you were going to answer, and my apologies for putting you right on the spot with that one, Greg.
I
But I
appreciate
thought it
it.
was worth it because I thought there's a really great answer coming here. I just don't know what it's going to be, but yeah, I think that is the story of hope, really, for this, isn't it? And I think if anybody is fearful, just answer Greg's question there, because that is the opportunity that all of us, all of us inside and outside of education, we face. Whatever way you're going to translate that into your own world, there is a fundamental question. There is, what if we were able to redream this and rethink this, not
Mhm.
based on the past, but maybe bringing some of the good things from the past in, and then looking at this as a huge opportunity. Greg, I'm going to put the details, obviously, in the link to the book, and how to contact you in the description below. What is your preferred means if somebody wants to carry this conversation on and they feel they want to sort of connect with you? What would be your preferred contact?
LinkedIn's the best way to reach me that way, and I do have a Substack. I that's where I kind of tried out some of the ideas of the book. I will return to it eventually and continue the conversation, but Substack, also called Aligned, is another way to do it too.
Brilliant. Dr. Greg Banks, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Neil. Such a pleasure talking with you.